Hi, I'm Michael Yardney, and if you cornered me and asked me what's the most important driver out of all the factors that influence property prices, what's the number one driver of capital growth, I'd have to say affordability. But don't get me wrong, it's probably not what you think. You see, unlike many others, I don't look for affordable properties. I look for areas where disposable incomes are higher and people can afford to and are prepared to pay a premium to live in those areas. Now that's very, very different. Let me explain how I do this. You see, over the last 5-year census period, wages in Australia went up about 20% on average, but in some municipalities, wages went up double that. If you think about it, in these areas, people clearly had high disposable incomes. They could spend it on fancy cars or on a big plasma TV screen, but many spent it on doing up their homes or buying better, fancier properties. These are the sort of areas I like to invest in, locations where there's a wide demographic of affluent people who can afford to and are prepared to pay a premium to live there because of the amenities, because of the lifestyle, because of the location. So how do you find these areas? Well, if you've been following my thoughts for a while, you'd know I've always recommended investing in our 4 big capital cities rather than in regional Australia. But it's more than that. I drill down to groups of suburbs that are going to outperform the averages, and these tend to be in the inner and middle ring locations. Interestingly, recently the Grattan Institute produced a study called Mapping Australia's Economy, and they came to the conclusion that 80% of the value of all the goods and services produced in Australia are generated on just 0.2% of our landmass, leading to an inescapable conclusion that our cities are the engines of our prosperity. The report maps the Australian economy by the location of economic activity, defined as the dollar value of goods and services produced by workers within that particular area. It finds that economic activity is concentrated most heavily in the central business districts and the inner areas of our large cities. This is partly because of the concentration of jobs in our CBDs, but also because jobs based within the inner city are more productive than those located elsewhere. Interestingly, the CBDs of Sydney and Melbourne, just 7.1 square kilometres, generate a total of $118 billion worth of our economy, 10% of our economy, and triple the contribution of the entire agricultural sector. Here's the reason the economic activity is so intense in our CBDs and our inner suburbs. Many businesses in these areas are knowledge intensive and specialised services such as fund management, insurance, design, engineering and international education. Now these businesses depend on highly skilled workers, and locating in the heart of the cities gives them access to the largest possible pool of these people who like to and can afford to live close to their jobs. Now this is very different to how it used to be in the past. Way back in the early 20th century, 1 in 3 workers were employed in primary industry, and almost half our population lived on rural properties or in towns of less than 3,000 people. Today, only 0.2% of our landmass is where we produce 80% of our economic activity. The predominance of these areas are in our 4 big capital cities, and this reflects our economy's evolution from one that's primary industry and then on to manufacturing, now to increasingly knowledge-intensive services. And the Grattan report found that the capital cities are vital to the economic activity, and they drive most of the economic activity in every state. As I said, economic activity is most dense in our CBDs. But even within metropolitan areas, economic activity is heavily focused in these central areas, and in each capital city, intense activity is focused on only a small number of locations. In Sydney, for example, half of all economic activity is generated from less than 1% of its landmass. And it's much the same in the other states as well. In the accompanying blog, you'll actually see graphs and maps of where all this is. Now, interestingly, people want to live where these jobs are. Of course, jobs are accessible if employees are prepared to commute long distances or travel long enough, but yet few people are willing to spend lots of time commuting. Given current travel patterns in Australia, job access was mapped by the Grattan Institute and found that people weren't prepared to drive more than 45 minutes or so. In all our capital cities, the large proportion of these good jobs are close to the CBD and they decline the further out you go. In the outer suburbs of Melbourne, for example, only 10% of the jobs can be reached within a 45-minute drive. In all our major capital cities, concluded Grattan, there's a major advantage living in proximity to the city's centre. When Grattan considered our public transport system, the conclusions were dreadful for the outer suburbs. In Sydney, for example, huge swathes of the city are totally cut off from access to most of the jobs, even if commuters are prepared to travel for a full hour by public transport. Okay, so what does this mean to you and me as property investors? To me, the conclusion is that Australia's economy continues to shift towards a more service-based economy, economic activity will be increasingly concentrated within our major capital cities. I think we recognise that. But this means the trend to more medium and high density living is going to grow more popular as Australians put a premium on living close to their jobs and also where the action is. This means dwellings closer to the CBD will continue to rise in value faster than outer ring suburbs. I also see our property markets in these locations underpinned by growing population and wealthy people in those locations. Now, there's nothing new about this. Recent Reserve Bank research shows that the ratio of the inner city to outer house prices continues to increase, and the ratio noticeably increases greater in the larger cities. They said declining job to worker ratios in some of the outer areas mean that many people are likely to face longer commutes than before, and the trade-off between space and place is getting steeper. Locating in the fringe areas, which are relatively less attractive, makes it actually properties less valuable. So you either have to trade off houses in the outer areas and longer distances to travel, or houses in the inner areas of our larger cities where people want to live, and that's going to come to a premium. So my conclusion is, if you want to grow your wealth through property investment, you're going to need to own the type of properties that are going to outperform the averages with regard to capital growth. And what this mapping shows is in the future it's going to be more medium density properties as more of us trade our backyards for balconies, and these are going to be in the inner and middle ring suburbs of our major capital cities, because this is where the economic activity is, where wages and disposable incomes will in general be higher, and where there's going to be amenities and lifestyle attractions. However, despite the jobs being plentiful within the CBDs of our cities, I don't think that's where you should invest, because there in general an oversupply will dampen capital growth and rental growth. Now, if you want to take advantage of the opportunities that our current property markets are offering, why not have a chat with the team at Metropole? Come in and have an obligation-free initial consultation. If you're a beginner, we'll help you get going. We'll help you overcome the hurdles that most beginning investors face. And if you're an experienced investor, we'd love to have a look at your current portfolio and give you some thoughts evaluating how it's going. So why not contact us at Metropole at 1300 20 30 30, and we look forward to helping you.